Hello, Peter, and welcome to Digitopia.
Glad to be here.
Great to see you again. In 2020, it seems more like we are located somewhere between dystopia and utopia, hopefully moving towards utopia. It was a truly visionary keynote address that you just made, and also seems to have relevance to individuals in these strange times. My favorite words were probably agility and creativity, which will help me adapt and navigate through this new situation. What about you, Peter? Do you have a favorite?
Well, I think experimentation would be my favorite. I think this is the perfect time to try new things and to take some risks, because I think that's the perfect way to address the never normal.
So although this session is pre-recorded, we did ask the audience to submit questions in advance. The first question we have is to you, Peter. When will the book, Never Normal, be published?
Normally next year, but I'm going to wait until we really have a full proof of the vaccine. That's the most important thing.
Okay, that's a good bit of product placement for you there, though. Joining us now for the panel discussion, we have two distinguished guests. First, a policymaker who has more knowledge on this topic than most people in Europe, if not the world, member of the European Parliament and chair of panel for the future of science and technology, Eva Kaili. Thank you for joining us, Eva.
Thank you for having me and your kind words. I don't think I could compare to the whole world's knowledge about AI, but thanks.
It's great to have you, and I believe you're joining us from Greece today.
Exactly. So this is something we have available through new technologies and finally working, teleworking during this pandemic. And thank you for having me. I wish I would be at your studio. It looks really amazing.
Thank you, Eva. Yeah, and it's perfect for Digitopia to have this setting. Next, representing the power sector in Europe, we have the Secretary General of Eurelectric, Christian Ruby. Thank you for joining us from Denmark.
Thank you, Bruce.
And the first question goes to you, Christian. Let's dive straight in. Peter's vaccine for companies stands for velocity, agility, creativity, innovation, networks, and experimentation. Now, those are words we don't traditionally associate with the electricity sector. How do you see that now, and how do you see it going forward?
Well, I think that essentially the notion of utilities is really changing these years. If you look back 10, 15 years, you were looking at an industry of regulated companies that were basically used to owning their customer base and working and operating as national monopolies. What we have today is an industry that has gone through a very significant liberalization. So today, the companies are working across borders. They are competing to sell their energy. They are competing for their customer base. And most importantly, they are leading the most fundamental industrial transformation that we're going through in the 21st century. So they have been basically forced, more or less, to really adopt a much more change-oriented mindset. I think what's new today is essentially that we're now looking at a completely new set of radical disruptors. This ecosystem of interconnected exponential technologies really has the potential to let us operate in a completely different way, to let us provide completely new services to customers, but also it does present us with a number of dilemmas in terms of how we ensure the trust of our customers and how we tackle new risks that are posed by this new set of technologies.
Yeah, and could you give us some examples of this mindset change? Maybe some of the companies you represent, some examples you have?
Well, I think there are plenty, actually. If you look at the Italian utility Enel, they're plowing 5 billion euros into a wholesale digital transformation of their company, basically introducing AI and other digital components in every single aspect of their business. If you look to the north, you have companies like Fortum that a few years ago basically re-evaluated their corporate values and chose curiosity as one of the core values for them to guide themselves in this period of very profound change.
Yeah, okay. And now another question from the audience that was submitted before the session on the opportunities. And how do you see and where do you see the opportunities for the power utilities with what you called game-changing technologies?
Well, I think we're basically looking at opportunities across the value chain for radical improvement of performance, whether it's in relation to the way we operate our assets prediction of new trends, whether it's how the materials in a certain asset are developing, or the weather resource, the weather they're trying to capture and transform into electricity. It's in relation to how we operate assets together, how we basically combine assets and how we make them work better together. And it's also in relation to developing more customer-friendly services, things that basically do things on their own, whether it's a heat pump that optimizes itself based on what price signals it gets from the market, or whether it's a charging device for a car that basically shuts on and off depending on how the grid is operating and how the prices are developing.
Yeah, and do you have, again, specific examples of how these companies are using these technologies? Some projects?
Well, I think we're seeing this really across the value chain, as I said. One good example is maintenance of wind turbines. Back in the days, you'd have a guy that would need to crawl up on the top of the turbine and then rappel down on the blades to inspect and see if there are any cracks in the blade. Today, what they're doing is they buy a really, really high quality camera. They put on a huge lens, and then they just photograph for a long time, and they let the computer basically assess those pictures. We're seeing that in other industries as well, where actually computers are better now at scanning for cancer, for example, than human beings. So this is just one very operational example of how you can take advantage of these technologies to improve service and cut costs.
Okay, thanks, Christian. Now to Eva, to follow up on the policy side. I mean, if anything, you have an even harder task as a policymaker to regulate such fast-paced technology development. How can you provide the right incentives and room for AI to develop whilst at the same time protecting consumer privacy and ethics?
Well, actually, 2020 and 21, we will have plenty of legislation around AI on the governance of data. And basically, we are trying to bind by law anyone who's working on artificial intelligence to make sure they will follow specific rules, and we will give them also legal certainty to achieve a real digital single market where people can have and companies can have access to data, which is not the case. I would say a market that is not allowing them to have access to good quality of data. So in order to do that, we have to take one step at a time. Because of the pandemic, we have accelerated our work and our legislative work. So we know where we want to go. We definitely know that we want to translate human rights and respect to the rule of law also online. This is what we're trying to do now with proper legislation. And we definitely need to have these ethics that we're talking about in Europe to be binding by law and embedded in the algorithms of AI applications. And the approach of the European Commission would be low risk and high risk. I think I like also this approach. It remains to be seen how it's gonna, the final text, how it's gonna be. But this means more access and faster development of low risk AI and more security criteria for high risk AI.
Okay, thank you. And we look forward to working with you over the coming years in developing those regulations along with the power sector. So we got another question submitted by the audience, and it's about social impact. I mean, what about social impact? We hear a lot about potential job losses from AI. I mean, is that really a threat? And if so, what can be done?
Well, actually, whenever we had a revolution, an industrial revolution, we had loss of jobs, and we had a transition to different systems, to different nature of jobs. So now digital skills will be definitely required. We will have creative thinking, a problem-solving mentality mostly needed. But still, I believe that in the end, if you see what happened every time, we had more jobs created than the jobs that were lost. What we're trying to do in Europe is to make this transition more smooth, to protect citizens, to prepare them, to give them access to acquire digital skills. And of course, this means they have to be able to adapt in the new environment and understand digitalization. This doesn't mean we all have to be computer scientists. So what we definitely need to do is to understand how technology works. The Commission has already launched digital innovation hubs. We are trying to help also small companies and SMEs to become more innovative, and the result would be to be more resilient. This means that we're trying to mentor them actually on how to use new technologies. I think this is essential, and I think we are moving to the right direction to achieve, to not have job losses that we cannot replace with maybe different nature of jobs, but to actually have more jobs there.
Okay, thanks, Eva. Now, Peter, back to you. I mean, you've heard from the policymaker, from the industry leader. What do you think so far of what you've heard?
Well, I would agree. I think there is potential huge opportunities to use technology to optimize a lot of the operations. But I think that's just a smaller part of the real opportunity that is out there. I think the consumer is, at the heart of this. And I think it's something which I've seen that the utility sector often has some difficulty with, because I think for a long time, the utility sector saw the consumer as somebody to send the bill to. And when I go back to what I talked about earlier, when I talk about being essential and relevant, of course the utility sector is very essential. You want to make sure that there is stable supply. But I think, how can the utility sector reinvent itself with all these technologies to be more relevant to the consumer? And I think there's a gigantic opportunity there. When I hear, for example, the potential of artificial intelligence, let's just not use that to make wind turbines more efficient. Let's rethink that, to use that data to really make the proposition for the end user a lot more interesting. And I think this is, the time to do that, the opportunity to rethink the role of the utility to become even more relevant in a world where consumers want to rethink what they want to do to help this planet to be more sustainable. A huge opportunity, I think, for utilities to play a role there.
No, that's for sure. The opportunities are clear, getting clear. What about the barriers? I mean, that's what our audience will really like to know. Okay, what are the barriers? How can we overcome them, from your experience in the sector?
Well, I think when you look at technologies like artificial intelligence, people get scared because the idea that machines will become smarter than us and what's going to happen with our information, what's going to happen with our data. But at the same time, what we see is that consumers feel pretty comfortable if they actually see that there's an exchange. I use the example of Waze. I like to give my information to Waze because I know that in the end, I'm going to be guided in a better way. And I think if utility and other companies are capable of understanding that this becomes an exchange, if customers want to give information, if they feel that they're getting something back, I think we can probably relieve a lot of those boundaries.
Yeah, very good. Good. Okay, so we've got time for one last question to all the panelists. Eva, we're going to start with you. And the question is, what is your one recommendation to the power utilities? So from your experience in the policy sector and the wider electricity sector, what would be your one recommendation to really exploit and make the most of these technologies? Eva, please.
Well, of course, in Europe, you know that everything now is passing from the prism of digitalization and green sustainability. So we need green innovation. I think what was said about how to support consumers to have a better experience and to have better services, cheaper, faster, and more safe and more secure is really essential. So I would say, first of all, help us while we legislate in order to be able to prioritize better how we can help you achieve that. And at the same time, you have to understand that sharing our location, because of the example that was mentioned with Waze, should give us more options. Share your location while you're using the app, not share your location constantly. So we need to have more options for European citizens, because this is why they feel comfortable in Europe, because they trust that we are protecting their privacy, we are respecting both safety and privacy, and we're not compromised one for the other. So I would say if we proceed into not compromising what safety and privacy is, I think we will achieve excellent results. And as for the specifically more in the energy sector, I think predictive maintenance will actually help us save a lot of costs, and I hope that these returns will be also an incentive for consumers to start using artificial intelligence more. They will use smart applications to achieve that, and then the companies will have to take clear responsibility on how they monitor, the analyze the AI data, and how citizens can control that. So I would say transparency, control for the citizens, more options will help us achieve and take advantage of the best AI possible. It's there to complement and benefit citizens. It's not there to replace. If this is clear, I think we can take the best out of these new technologies and this transformation that is happening.
Thanks, Eva. Good positive note to finish on there from you. And now to Peter. And you started to tease a few of those recommendations, if you like, in your last answer. But if you could pick one recommendation for the power utilities going forward, what would it be?
Well, I think there's an opportunity because there's always been a sort of innate conservatism in a lot of the utilities. But I think this is the timing to really step up to the plate. I think there are a couple of utilities who can actually truly become a phoenix, as I call them, who can reinvent themselves and not just fall into the commodity trap, which is all about price, but really rethink the relevance for consumers and get a lot stronger as a result. So I'm hoping that a few utilities can really rise to the occasion and become true phoenixes.
That's good takeaway. Thanks, Peter. And finally to Christian, what is your recommendation to our members, the power sector, utilities, from your side?
I think it's really about placing this at the heart of the strategic work and development of the companies, because this goes into the people you recruit, it goes into the investments you make, and it goes into the whole way you operate your company. As we discussed, it's about the asset operations, but it's also very much about the development of new value propositions for customers. So understanding and harnessing the potential of this technology is really, really critical in order for utilities to take the next steps and be ready for those radical accelerations that we're going to see, not only in this sector, but really in society at large.
Perfect. Thanks, Christian. And that's it for this panel, unfortunately. But a big thank you to our speakers, to Peter, Eva, Christian. Thanks so much for joining us. And the next session will start in a few minutes, so meet me to learn more about corporate sourcing of renewable electricity. In the meantime, enjoy your digital detox. Thank you.